Welcome to Shield Maidens, Women of the Norse World, the podcast that celebrates the remarkable women of the Viking Age. From fierce warriors and powerful queens to wise seers and cunning goddesses, these women left an indelible mark on history. Join authors Johanna Wittenberg and K.S. Barton each month as we explore the stories, achievements, and impact of Norse women. Welcome to Shield Maidens, Women of the Norse World. This is episode 27, in which Johanna and I have the pleasure of speaking with best-selling author Melanie Karsak. I'm K.S. Barton, the author of the Norse Family Trilogy, in which a young Viking woman and a Viking warrior are caught in a deadly blood feud between two brothers. And with me is Johanna Wittenberg. Hi, Johanna.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Good. So I'm Johanna Wittenberg, author of the Norse Women series, which is the story of a real Norse queen who ruled alone in the early 9th century, which was the dawn of the Viking Age.
All right. On to our lovely guest. Melanie Karsak is a New York Times and U.S. Today bestselling author, celebrated for her immersive historical fantasy novels that spotlight the untold stories of marginalized women throughout history. With a penchant for weaving rich narratives, she brings to life formidable heroines such as Lady Macbeth in the Celtic Blood series and Queen Boudica in the Celtic Rebels series, offering readers a fresh perspective on these legendary figures. Her acclaimed Road to Valhalla series delves into the sagas of Viking shield maidens, while the Eagles and Crows series explores the life of Queen Cartimandua of the Celtic Brigantes tribe. Karsak's storytelling is renowned for its seamless blend of historical accuracy and imaginative fantasy, creating worlds where history and myth entwine. Residing in Florida with her husband and two children, Karsak continues to enchant readers with her dynamic characters and engaging plots. Her dedication to unearthing and narrating the stories of history's overlooked women not only entertains, but also educates, shedding light on the complexities and strengths of these historical figures. Welcome, Melanie.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. And reading that, I'm thinking, wow, you have written so many books and series. But you've recently released Sword of a Valkyrie, which is book 2 of your Vinland to Valhalla series, which I just love that Vinland to Valhalla. It has such a nice ring to it. So you've chosen to write about Freydis in this series, who's the daughter of Eric the Red, whose story we find in the Vinland sagas. So can you tell us a little bit about this book and the series and maybe what drew you to Freydis?
Yeah. I always like the kind of unsung heroes or the underdogs for any of these books. And Freydis is one of those ones there. She's almost like a kind of a footnote in the sagas of, what her father or her brother were doing. So everything seems to either be about Eric or about Leif, which she's right along there with them. And then when we do get a recounting of her contributions to those early voyages and developments, of Greenland and things like that, it's always skewed, right? So what few depictions we have of Freydis, they make her out like a Lady Macbeth. They make her look like a mad woman, right? Or they just find a way to twist it so they depict her in ways that don't feel authentic to what you might expect. So that sort of thing makes me mad. And so whenever anything makes me mad like that, then that's who I need to write a story about. And then the Vikings TV show also incorporated Freydis as a character, but the depiction was not quite in alignment with what was in the sagas. So I wanted to kind of course correct, even a little bit about that and just really delve into what her life might have looked like back then from everything, right? From religious beliefs to contributions and so forth.
When you said it makes you mad that it doesn't seem authentic, Johanna and I have talked about that, especially with Queen Osa. Johanna knows about that well, like reading these things and going, that just doesn't seem right. Like this woman would do that. So did you want to expand on that, Johanna?
Yeah, well, they have Queen Osa getting her shoe boy to kill Gudrid, and I don't buy that. For one thing, I can't imagine anyone falling for that unless he was a complete simpleton. But then why would I write about a character who was, who would take advantage of somebody who is that naive? And Freydis is kind of a similar character. They have one of the depictions of her is a cold-blooded axe murderer,
Yes.
and that's the saga of the Greenlanders. And whereas the Eric the Red saga shows her as a heroine. So which is she? That's something
Right.
we've always kind of discussed on this show about her.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of times they strip away agency, right? And then it depending, everything's through the lens of who's writing the story. So, right, version is courageous and the next she's plotting murder and these sorts of things. It doesn't add up, right? And you don't get a true sense of it. So, and neither one of them feels entirely right. So,
Yeah, I've often felt with Osa that the whole reason they kept her in the Heimskringla was simply to establish Harold Fairhair's lineage, to
yes.
show that he was descended from the kings of Vestfold and
Mhm.
Agder.
Absolutely.
Otherwise they wouldn't have included her at all.
Oh yeah, that's right. And I think I see that too, like with some of the other characters I have. Cardamandu is another example that's like that she is sort of a footnote that's just mentioned to intensify the glory of the Roman occupation of Britain, right? And so
And she was much maligned.
much maligned, especially Cardamandu, yes, for sure.
So you, as we were talking about, you write about women who you call marginalized heroines. And so what inspired you to start this? Because you started with Lady Macbeth was your first one. That's the first one I read. So tell us about that a little bit more.
Sure.
How you got started.
Yeah. Well, I think like a lot of us have been writing for as long as I can remember. But my lady Macbeth, I'm gonna have to credit my high school English teacher, Mrs. Wilkinson. So that was her name. And she had done a unit on Shakespeare. And at some point, I remember she turned and said to me, she's like, wouldn't it be interesting to know what she was really like? And I'm like, yes, it would
Oh,
definitely be interesting to
nice.
know what she was really like. And so that always kind of stuck with me. And then when I went to college, I had just by luck, I took a course in Celtic history. And the professor I had, Dr. Benjamin Hudson, he's like one of the foremost Macbeth scholars out there. He literally wrote the book on the Macbeths, on who they really were. So I had that kind of kernel in my mind already, and then was just by good fortune able to study under him, in his course and learn about the Macbeths. And so, okay, I was like, all right, well, that is on my to-do list, right? To write about Lady Macbeth and the Macbeths and what they were like. But I didn't really get around to it for a while. And then I started writing the novel and it took forever because as I was really a novice writer at that time. I didn't really realize I was writing a series and not a novel. It's like a, gigantic 3,000 page epic. So I'm like, why is this book taking so long? Because I didn't know better. But but yeah, I was really enjoying like kind of pairing, like doing the research on Lady Macbeth, finding out who she really was, what his things are written about her and history, and trying to bring that story out, but then also pair it with like more religious traditions from Celtic history, the more matriarchal beliefs, and so kind of just bringing all of that, who she was, as well as those belief system, and kind of pairing that together to give us a picture of someone that seemed a bit more rounded or realistic, or just a different way of looking at her to make a more sympathetic character than how Shakespeare ends up depicting her as a kind of cold-blooded calculating murderer, right? Like why would why was she like that, or what motivated her? What was she really like? So those are those questions that really stuck with me, and I really wanted to show a different side. So and I think that's true for a lot of my characters.
Yeah, for sure. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Nice shout out to your teacher. That's neat that
Hmm.
she planted that.
Yeah, yeah. All those years, right? It just stayed in there and just germinated. So that,
Yeah. I had a high school English teacher when I was a senior, and he had this Shakespeare class that even though it was a Shakespeare class, like everybody wanted to be in this class, and you had to like get there early, and like he only took anyway, and he was like this really cool guy. He surfed. I lived in Southern California at the time, and like he made Shakespeare so fun. Like he would have us read it, he'd get excited. I remember he was Iago one time. He was like jumping up on the desk and
Oh,
like,
wow.
give me your money or whatever it was that Iago says. And it was just so yeah, when you said that about your teacher, I was like, oh yeah, I should mention, Mr. Lanker who like inspired me in so many ways too. That's neat when a teacher, it's nice to hear when
Right.
teachers can inspire somebody and that carries over for years and years or decades.
Yeah, absolutely. And I ended up in academia, before I was writing full time. That I'm actually was an English professor for many, many years, and I actually was Shakespeare was my research area. So
Oh, nice.
Wilkinson formed who I became. So
Yeah.
really, yeah.
Yeah, I studied a lot of Shakespeare too. I even taught it a few times as
Did you?
well.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
That's
it's
wonderful.
pretty great stuff. Oh, and I also can relate to like writing that first book that all of a sudden this one book is like 5,000 pages long and you're like,
Right.
this
And at least for me, and terrible. The first draft was
oh
really,
yeah.
it was really terrible.
Yeah.
So
The first draft of my first book has never been seen by anybody other than my critique group. And there's one of the women in my critique group who was like, I think you have a trilogy here. This isn't one book. So, yeah, nobody's seen that except them. So, and
yeah,
nobody
I think
will.
we all have books in drawers. Yeah,
The
Macbeth got
sock drawer
dusted.
novel.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
No one ever needs to see those.
No.
Yeah, it took me 6 years to write the first book in my series just because, like you said, I was learning how to write a book.
Yeah.
First of all, that's a big deal. And then all the research that has to go into it. I mean, I love that research, but it's incredible how much research you have to put in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Even just researching just tiny little details like, oh, okay, did this particular fruit happen to grow like it's just all those little things like, and I do try to get those right. I know it's not perfect, but you can spend an hour just trying to find out what kind of berry grew on that part of that island in that year. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I love doing that though.
Yeah, I
It
do too.
is
I get
fun.
lost.
It is fun.
So I know that we were talking about Lady Macbeth, and you changed quite a bit in the book from what we know from Shakespeare, and very little is actually known historically about the Macbeth story. Like you said, you added a lot of the Celtic beliefs and the matriarchal. It's really interesting how you came to do that.
Yeah, so I ended up with kind of a combination, I think, a little bit of what Shakespeare had and what history there is. Like as you said, the historical Macbeths, it's basically just an outline. They did exist. I think Lady Macbeth, whose name was Gruach, when I wrote my first draft of my book, I nicknamed her Gru for the whole book, and then that was before Despicable Me came out. And and once that came out, I am like, nope, we have a different nickname now. So, but we know about Gruach because she had a husband before Macbeth. She was historically married to the Mormaer of Moray, a man named Gillicoman or Gillicoman Gaines. So it depends on.
A mouthful.
Yeah, he's got a lot of letters in his name. So, and she had a son with him, by the name of Lulak. Macbeth murdered him. And then grew up, ends up in a situation where she needs to marry again. She's either going to marry Duncan or she's going to marry Macbeth. In my series, that's a kind of heart-wrenching decision of how that happens. But in history, she marries Macbeth, and Macbeth adopts her son. And once King Duncan is killed off, the Macbeths rule fairly peacefully for a long time. And then they kind of fade away from the scene once Macbeth dies. We have no knowledge of what happens to Lady Macbeth. She did not have the outdam spot scene. That's all Shakespeare. All right. And then history seems to suggest she lived a long life, but then she kind of fades out of the picture, and her son is very briefly King of Scotland. I think he made it about a year. So that's not bad, I guess, on a Scottish throne. So
Yeah.
but that's, that's really, the kind of outline we get from history. And then, Shakespeare gives us all the juicy details, right? The depiction of her as the kind of mastermind behind things. And the thing that I latched onto from Shakespeare was the character of Banquo, because I kind of liked this idea of, oh, maybe, Lady Macbeth or Gruach and Banquo knew each other, and maybe there's more to this friendship. And so that's how I ended up kind of with this little weird love triangle in my story. So I incorporate the character of Banquo in just to make it a little more, I don't know, spicy and dramatic. So because in my story he's a druid, and he's druid taught, and that's how they meet, because she herself is druid taught. She serves the old Celtic goddesses, and has some mythological experiences. My books are really historical fantasy more than historical fiction, or somewhere riding that line from time to time, wiggling on one side or the other. So I have a lot of that fantastical elements in there as well. But I tried to base them like on the actual beliefs of the period, and the people of that time, right? So I try to, build those beliefs out, or build those experiences out of actual belief systems. So yeah, so that's how we end up with my character of Lady Macbeth. She's kind of this combination of the historical figure with a little bit of Shakespeare thrown in, and then we're adding a little bit of fantasy on top of that. So makes it fun to write.
Absolutely. Well, I've noticed that it's really difficult to write about that time period without including some fantasy elements, some magic, because their society believed in it so
Yeah.
firmly, including, the church believed in magic at that time very decidedly. So you can't really omit it. And I've never really, if you want to give the flavor of the time period, you have to include some kind of magic,
I
or
think
at
so
least their
too.
beliefs. Yeah.
And it's fun to incorporate, right? How that, those old fairy beliefs, and we've got a whole magical world of standing stones, and caves that are portals, and fairy belief system, and the goddesses themselves are fascinating. So, and then you have the tension, right, with the rising wave of Christianity, and how does that play into things? So
Did you always know you were going to do like more ride that line between fiction and fantasy, or like historical fiction and historical fantasy, or did that evolve as you were writing your first few books or so?
Yeah, so I think I have a kind of, weird trajectory with things. So I did write my Lady Macbeth novel, and then novel slash series. And then I tried to, this was like before self-publishing got really big. So I did try to go the traditional publishing route with it. And I had really good feedback. My timing was just not great. Susan Fraser King has her Lady Macbeth novel, and it was published right around that time. And I think people were just not interested in another novel at that time. And also because I was a new writer, my book kind of sucked. So it needed a lot of polishing. I can say that now. At the time, I was like, I don't know what's the matter with these people. They're crazy. But no, they were right. It needed work. Um, so I wrote that book, and I tried to traditionally publish it, and it did not work out. And I felt a little heartbroken, to be honest. And so I sort of set it aside. And I thought, well, I'll come back to it one day. And then, I don't know, around 2010, 2011, a friend said to me, Melanie, their self-publishing is getting really big. It was when Amanda Hawking was, going really big. And they're like, maybe you should, try again. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be like super literary. I'm like, what can I do that's just fun to just try this out? And the very first series I published back in 2012, and I self-published it, it's this crazy hodgepodge of a zombie apocalypse with fairies. So I have
Nice.
my first series I published it's a zombie, it's a 5-book zombie apocalypse series. It's got fairies and vampires in it. And so that's what I started out with. And I almost did it to like kind of just push myself to just have fun with things. And so yeah, I was kind of all over the place until I sort of landed back into just writing this historical fantasies because I've got that zombie stuff, and then I wrote a bunch of steampunk stuff, and then I've got some cozy fantasy stuff, and then, but over the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years or stuff or so, I've been mostly just writing the historical fantasy fiction. So I think
Wow,
that,
so
yeah,
yeah,
the,
that's
yeah.
interesting. I imagine you've done a lot better as an indie author than you would have as a traditionally published author. I mean, it seems like your books are just always up at the top of the ranking lists and everything.
Well, I try really hard. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. I've got a lot of, great readers that support me and have been patient as I've hopped from zombies to fairies to steampunk to Celtic to back to who knows what, which is so yeah, I feel very fortunate that I found my readers and that they've hung in there with me as I bounce around from thing to thing. So
Well, you do seem to have a lot of things in common, like things that are kind of like your I hate to use the word brand, but like themes and things that are like your books, and
uh,
a reader can go from a fairy tale retelling to reading about Hervor or Freydis or something and find some commonalities. Like your voice is similar.
yeah, thank you. I try to write, the strong female character I think is important to me. So we always have that kind of character leading the charge in the front of all of those books. So I guess yeah, that is true with that.
So, all right. So you mentioned how you landed on Lady Macbeth, and you did say something about like being things when they make you mad, you realize that that's the first thing you're going to have to write about. So can
Yes.
you kind of give us a little like overview of like how Lady Macbeth and Hervor and Boudica and Freydis and all these like there's a lot in common because they're all like Northern European, Scandinavian, Celtic, whatever. And what is it how do you decide like, okay, this time I'm going to write a series about Freydis
Right.
or I'm going to write about Hervor? Like, do you just like come across it like in a saga or in a story and you go, oh, I want to know more about her? Or how does it go?
Yeah, yeah, I think for Hervor is a great one to talk about because that was one where I was just researching Norse mythology, looking into some of the old legends. I mentioned like the TV show Vikings made the concept of this shield maiden very popular. So we all loved Lagertha, right? So, but there was never a good Lagertha book out there. We were all looking for something, right? So, and I think that that's when I started looking at like the more, well, what's in the sagas? Who did they write about, right? And that's where we have characters like Asa and things that are kind of undertold. And then I got to the saga of Hervor and Hedrick. So that was amazing for me. So we have this sort of great epic about a mother and her son, and I mean, of course, it focuses mostly on her son. Let's be honest, but they've got magical dwarven swords and cases of, mistaken identity. And we've got all these really cool things. And so that's where I found Hervor was just sort of an exploration, or as you were saying, just kind of looking to see, what's out there, like what kind of stories have already been told, and what could we learn from them, or how can we maybe even expand upon them, or as I said, breathe life into those characters. And Hervor was another great one where what's what's depicted of her in the saga, like she's there, she has this famous father, she goes through this hero's journey where she tries to get her father's sword, and then she manages to do that, and then the story becomes about her sons, and so she just kind of fritters off as well into history. And I'm like, well, that's not enough. We need more about her. So that was sort of how I latched onto her and wrote um, about her story, because there's actually two Hervors in the saga of Hervor and Hedrick, and so I wrote first generation and then second generation. So Hervor gets the first, I think, 5 books, and then her granddaughter Ervi, which is the second Hervor, she is the one who took on the Huns. And she got the second, the last four books, and we included a book with the mother as well. So I was writing those during like COVID and stuff. So that was all I was doing. Like was it was kind of weird. I wrote the first book right before COVID, and then in the second book, this horrible plague takes over like the island where they live, and then COVID comes along, and I'm like, oh no. So, but then that was I think those books were how I kept myself sane during COVID. So that's how I ended up with Hervor. And I know you ladies are the same way. Like we love to see the strong female character, right? That's traditionally, especially in the Norse stuff, it's missing from what is in the movies or in TV. And I think all three of us have felt that pull to like put our characters and their voices out there. So we have other depictions of that. So that's how I ended up with Hervor. Boudica is like she's the ultimate rage invoking tale, right? So she was fairly easy to latch on to. She was another one whose story I heard, early on, and how the about the tales of the Roman invasion and how the Romans took over her tribe and how she was, the history talks about how she was assaulted and her daughters were assaulted and how that led to her leading a rebellion. So she's another one that we get that image of her, like Queen Boudica, whose husband Prasutagus has died, and she's gone through this terrible assault by Rome, and then she leads a rebellion. But what else about her? Like, who was she? Where did she come from? What did she believe in? Right? Who was that person before she was this epic, fiery warrior queen just riding in her chariot and taking out the Romans, right? So she's another fascinating one. And with Boudica, then you get tangentially involved with Cartimandua because they were contemporaries. So Cartimandua is like the first recorded queen because she was ruling before Boudica was in power. So she's like the first recorded queen in the British Isles. And or at least in well, she was like on the border between England and Scotland. So it gets hazy when you go too far back, right? But she's like the first recorded queen, and all we know about her is that the Romans said she had an affair with her husband's armor bearer, and it basically ruined her life. Well, she didn't only do that. Like, what else did she do, right? Where did she come from? What did she believe in? Who were her people, the Brigantes? What did they believe in? And then when you kind of uncover what's happening in history, especially in Cartimandua's time, like this lady was ruling before Rome got there, and then she managed to hang on to her tribe when everybody else around her was falling like dominoes for a really long time. And so it becomes apparent that she wasn't just this tardy girl that was sleeping with her husband's like armor bearer. She was like a mastermind because she somehow managed to survive the Roman occupation of Britain. And the only reason she ever lost was she got screwed over by her husband. So it's not like the Romans took her out. It was inner workings of her own people. So yeah, those little things like that when you find those little details, like, the unsung story of Hervor, or who was Boudica, or who was this wonderful, amazingly brilliant queen that we just make a footnote in history. Like those stories, those really attract me. I always want to know more about who those people were.
It's interesting too because Hervor is like the only one who is not necessarily based in fact, but yet there's some, clues that say that maybe she really was a real person, but we don't
Yeah.
know that for sure. At this point, she's pretty much mythological, I guess.
Exactly right. Because I think Saga was written around the 13th century, depicting like the 4th century, and we're talking about cities that don't exist on maps, and you know what I mean. We're really getting into the mythology. So like her husband and stuff. We're talking about, okay, well, he was a giant and he was a half giant. So yeah, you're way back in there into the mythological era. So you can really play with things then. That's why
Mhm.
I like to have Loki. I always have Loki skulking around around in my stories. So, oh,
Who
it's
doesn't like Loki?
great. It's so much fun to have him messing with people and, not to spoil anything for anyone, but really he's the mastermind behind that entire saga. He's controlling everything that happens to these people and he's playing his own game and they're just puppets. So that's kind of fun to do. And I'm playing his strings. So
Right.
The ultimate puppet master.
that's right.
Well, you said, Hervar is mostly myth, but Ragnar is like King Arthur. Like, was he real? Is he mythological? Is he a mixture of a whole bunch of different people of that time period? He's no more steeped in reality than some of these women are either. And yet we put him up as if like, oh, Ragnar, he was a real guy. He was a real king and did this and this and that. But I don't know, was he, or is he just like a bunch of like different people or legends or things? Because, he fought a dragon and that's not really real, is it?
Right.
I'd like it to believe it would be. There really were dragons.
Yeah, they can't decide whether how many wives did Ragnar have? How many children did Ragnar have? In which order? Like, yeah, there's such a lack of clarity on that whole family tree. So,
But I
It
think
was
it's
just,
to make these women real, like people have made Ragnar real. So
right.
that's what we're
Exactly.
doing, bringing them to life, like you said. So, you've also written a lot of fairy tale retellings. And from what I understand, you're saying that these were earlier on. Are you still writing them or, because I noticed you have quite a lot of them.
I do.
Like,
I have like one fairy tale world that's set in kind of gas lamp steampunky Victorian England. And so all of those stories kind of exist in that same world. So I have a little bit longer running series. It was kind of a Red Riding Hood series that's set in that world. I have my character Clemeny. She's our Red Riding Hood, and she's kind of like a James Bond of that
oh,
time period. Or I think of her as like she's gonna maybe like a Dean Winchester kind of character, but her job is she belongs to an organization, the Red Cape Society, that's under the direction of Queen Victoria, and their job is to marshal or police the supernatural elements in the realm. So that's what her job is, and so we have a kind of it's kind of almost like a Monster of the Week kind of series, so that she goes through different adventures where she's fighting, whether it's werewolves, of course, right, or vampires, or magicians, or whatever it may be. So she's kind of the primary character of those fairy tales, and a lot of the other stories kind of circle around what she's doing. So I have a few others in that series. Like I have Alice in Wonderland retelling, and so Alice is in that same world, but she's a thief. So she's kind of, they call her the Bandersnatch, right? So she's one of the bad guys technically in this world that Clemeny is policing. And then we have my Snow Queen retelling where we have the character of Elise and Kai, because I went through like the old fashioned Snow Queen fairy tale, not the Elsa version. And they get trapped when the River Thames froze. They're part of a frost fair, and they're there with, going back to Shakespeare, the fairy king and queen are there, and they're having a feud. And poor Elise gets trapped in the middle of that. So that's another tangential story that hangs out in that world. And then my beauty is she's a tinkerer, so she's a mechanic. She ends up on an island enchanted with Welsh fairies. And then the last one I think I did in that series was the Rapunzel, and she's an heir of King Arthur, and we've got some dragons in that one. So that series, or that world, I should say, is mostly closed at this point. I have one last trilogy that I'm working on, and that's a Sleeping Beauty, and that's been really fun to write. She's she's kind of from a fairy lineage, and she's out looking for her Maleficent type character. So we've just got book one of Spindles and Thorns, and that one's out. And she also later becomes part of that Red Cape Society. So that fairy tale world is just one whole big world that is set under that Victorian umbrella. So it still ends up being historical anyway, just a different era. So.
How did you
That
dream
sounds
that
fun.
up? That sounds great.
Oh, I don't know. I was really interested in steampunk at that time, and I loved all the aesthetics. And I don't know. Those are some of those characters that just kind of their voices just kind of appeared to you. Clemeny was supposed to be just one book, and she ended up being a 6-book series with lots of Easter eggs and other books. She likes to talk, so I just let her go. So she's fun to write because she's sassy and so.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, she's fun.
I like steampunk too. It's really fun to read.
The aesthetic, everything about it is really fun. I think it's maybe not as quite as popular as it used to be, but it's a lot of fun to play with. Airships and all that. So
Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of magic in your books, and we talked about that. Like, so how do you develop your magic systems? How do you decide like how much? Like, are you going to just go strictly by what they believe in at the time, or maybe branch out a little bit into some like more modern type fantasy? Like, how do you develop the magic in your books
yeah,
or worlds?
yeah. I would say for the historical fantasies, I usually I start with the belief systems of the people. And we were talking about Loki, right? And I think that's kind of a good example. It's like, okay, so you start with Norse myth and belief, and then how far do you take it, right? How much do you incorporate? Do you incorporate Loki as a character? Like, is he actively doing shenanigans with your characters in your world? And then so I think I kind of start out on the historical line and with the mythology of the people in the time, and then I take one step toward epic fantasy, and that's usually where I stop. I
Mm,
don't try to go too deep into it, but I do have things like the Wolves of Balmso. They're I guess sort of mythological characters that I created that are part of Hervor's story. And so they are like ethereal magical wolves that will sometimes show up and fight with them, right? And that's pure fantasy kind of thing. That's coming into that element of that. So I don't go really I try not to go too far off because I want it to feel like, this could really happen because it's not so deep into that sort of epic fantasy feel. Like there is magic in the world and there are these magical creatures and there are fairies and things, but like not so far, not so deep in. So usually with the historicals, like I said, start on that line and just take one step into epic fantasy and kind of hold there. And I think I do that with the Victorians as well. I have one contemporary series. It's a cozy fantasy series, and that's, I think, a little bit more almost like I don't know how I would describe it, women's fiction, soft urban fantasy. I don't know, but we have like fairies, we have witchcraft, we have mermaids, like that's that. But again, it's not these huge like I'm thinking like old like times like Piers Anthony, like
mm.
big
Right.
like systems of magic. I don't think my brain can hold all of that information. So I got to start from something that's maybe a little more fixed and then just enhance it a bit.
I like that description because I've been working on a historical fantasy and I'm trying to stick with like just what they believed in, like with people like being shape strong and like not shifting, but like projecting their, into like an animal kind of thing. And just some other things like runic magic and being, going into trances to, see into the future and stuff like that. But then I just like, as I was writing, this one thing came out that this one woman could do. And I was like, well, I really like that. I think that's kind of cool, but I don't think it has any historical basis. But then I was like, well, the sagas and everything are so like stuff about women is so thin anyway. So
Mhm.
how do we know somebody couldn't do such and such thing? It's not completely out of the realm of possibility that somebody maybe could be able to do. And like if we don't even keep track of a queen like Queen Osa, like how do we know what like just like some normal women who could go into trances and see the future. Like, how are we gonna know exactly what these women could actually do? So I was like, like how? And I've decided I'm just gonna keep it, even though there's nothing I've ever read that this particular power has ever existed. So I was like, well, it could.
I think that shape-shifting is a really good one to mention, right? Because we see that all through the Norse myth and in the sagas, right? The idea that they were able to shift. Now, and then as you said, like how far do you take that, right? Like, are you taking on the animality, right, of a bear, or are you literally becoming a bear, right? So that some of that is kind of left up to interpretation in some ways, right? So yeah, but you're right. Like, even we're talking about I hope I'm pronouncing it cedar or the magic systems, right? How far do you go with that, right? With the runic magic or with the power of a vulva, right? That they can see. Like, how far do you go with that? Are we talking like Merlin level magic, or are we talking more like, I don't know, rustic magic? I mean, like, how far can and should you go? But as you said, like when you get deeper into like the older stuff, the mythology and stuff, like, I mean, you can go quite far. Yeah, let's be an actual bear. Let's be an actual bird. Like, why not? Let's go for it. And so,
Yeah. I mean, we barely even know about many of the goddesses. So there's, most of the stories are about Freya. She's in a lot of them, but we don't know much about any of the others. So if we don't even know much about the goddesses, like, how do we know what actual human women were doing?
There's so much omitted from the sagas, and so much is assumed because that you
Mhm.
already know about it, that we don't know about. But it's like, I think we were talking another episode, we were talking about how, if you're saying somebody got married, you wouldn't describe the wedding in minute detail because we know what a wedding is like.
Right.
Well, magic, I think, was the same way. Everybody knew about what magic was like, and they understood the rules of magic, so they didn't go into it much detail. So we just have to get what little scraps we can to try to build a magic world, from what little is available, which is really not much. In fact, we were talking in another episode about how you can find out more about what was done by what they outlawed.
Mm-hmm.
Like sitting on a mound and waking up the trolls was actually outlawed in the Grey Goose laws of Iceland. So obviously people did that, but they wouldn't have written a law about it.
Right. It's because people like Hervor went and bothered the mounds.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Demanded her sword back. Yeah.
Right. That's
So,
one of my favorite stories. I just love that she goes to that island and it's spooky and there's like the fire coming out of the grave mounds and her crew is like, nope.
Yep.
She's
And
sassy with her dad, right? Give me the sword.
yeah, and he keeps telling her like, no, you don't want to take this sword. It's cursed. And she's just like, let me deal with that. It's such a great visual of this crew that won't go with her, all these men who won't go with her. She just leaves them behind. Don't they even like just row off,
They
like leave? They
abandoned
don't
her.
even
Yeah.
like stay on the,
Yeah, they abandoned her.
dock. They totally abandon her and she just this creepy, spooky island. She just walks right up to this burial mound, and her father was a berserker. I mean, just like
Yeah. Yeah,
she had
exactly.
some serious guts. So
Yep,
it's a great
exactly.
story.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It sparks the imagination too, right? So then,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so now she's got a sword that's cursed. Like, what happens to it after that? It's like, okay, so that's what becomes interesting. How's that curse gonna play out? So,
Hmm. And who doesn't love a story about a cursed sword? I mean,
Yeah.
dwarven cursed sword too. That's
right?
yeah, like dwarven steel, right? So, but you were right. You were saying about the goddesses. Like, there's so many things like that we just don't get a look at. Like Thor's mother, Jord, right? The goddess of the earth. Like you really have to dig and look and to find more information. You get outside of that main Norse pantheon, like. then you're kind of out in the weeds learning about things that should be, I don't know, known better, or understood better. And I mean, the whole philosophy, like the notion of the parts of the soul in Norse belief, that, the hammer and hunger, like that, like it takes a different mindset. Like once you kind of understand that they believe differently, right? Then you can almost build those magic systems off of that as well. So yeah, it's really cool.
It is cool.
Yeah, we don't know anything much about Thor's wife except for her hair and all that, this one story. And I think she had another child before him. And it's just like, oh, that's really interesting. Or Loki's wife, or, all these, the healing goddesses. And it's just really, it's too bad that we don't have more. There's no proof that they were suppressed, but they probably were. Like, like people like Snorri Sturluson, who wrote them down, maybe just was like, nope, not going to include that.
Yeah.
Or they just got lost.
Yeah, because there was a lot more that we just don't have.
Absolutely.
So you've also, I mean, as we've been talking, like you've written an amazing number of books. I'm in awe. How do you do that? How are you so prolific?
I don't know.
Tell me your secret.
With a lot of caffeine, yes. What I can say is that once I can get going, I can put down a lot of words on a page. But I do need to be able to have like stretches of time where I'm not interrupted and I can concentrate. So so yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I can write a lot when I get those good stretches, and I think that's really probably the key to being prolific. But once I'm done with a book, I like fold like a house of cards for like a month. And I'm like complete,
I can
like I'm
imagine.
like I can't do anything. I can't think of anything. And it's like a race to the finish every time. Like my editor will tell you, like by the time I'm done with the book, I'm like covered in hives. Like
Oh.
but it's like an ordeal each time. It's like running a race. And once that race is done, you kind of collapse, take a little break, and then pick yourself back up and then do it again. And I think that's over and over again, that's what I do. But I mean, this is my full-time job, so I'm not like working part-time elsewhere. Like this is what I do. So when I'm not doing mom stuff. So a lot of times the mom stuff keeps me busy too. But that's kind of how it is, like just getting on a stretch of time and writing like that. So before, when I was still teaching, I was taking advantage of like summers. So I would write a lot in the summer. And then, being a professor, I had that a little bit of flexibility in like my academic schedule so that when I was not at the college teaching, I had time at home. And my kids were little then, and they were going to regular public school at that time. Now they're homeschooled. So they're, well, I would say they're doing virtual school. So they're at home. So we have a little bit more traffic in the house these days. So but they're teenagers, so they're busy with their own things. But yeah, so I think that's kind of what it is. It's just that cycle of race and then rest and race and then rest. So, and then
So
sometimes
when you're on one of those, when you're in the race, like how many words are you getting written in a day? I'm just curious as
yeah.
As a fellow writer.
as a fellow writer.
So like on really good, I'll start like an average, let's say, or an average day is about 2,500 words. Like, and then on a really good day, we're somewhere more like 7,000
Oh, wow.
words or so.
Wow.
But then I have started doing dictating, which I had not done before, but I found that it was kind of helping. Like if sometimes I have some brain fog, and so I'm like, well, that maybe that will help. And so I tried dictating, and I can get like 10,000 words out like that. Now they're a mess and takes time to fix. But so like I said, that's why it's more like that kind of race and then rest, because I can get a lot out at one time, but I have to like need a little recovery time afterwards. So
Oh, I can imagine.
yeah.
It's like also, how do you manage the physical toll that writing takes? And especially when you're sitting at your desk, or I use a sit stand desk, and that helps quite a bit. But I mean, there's an awful lot of physical damage that happens from that kind of that much focus on writing.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel it in your hands or anywhere else. So, and that's why that dictation has actually helped. I never was really good at it before, and I'm like, well, I'm going to give it a try, and it did increase my productivity. So,
Did you find a particular program that worked better for you or?
oh no, I'm really simple. I write in Word, and then now when I'm doing dictation, I'm using words like
Yeah,
I'm like,
they
so
have a word. It doesn't understand a word that I say, but
I see. I have to repeat things a lot because sometimes it gets really funny things.
yeah.
Do you do outlines or are you as a discovery writer
I start out
or in
so,
between?
I think what I usually do is I do since I do write a lot of hero's journey stories, I kind of know what the narrative arc will be.
Mm.
So intend to follow that. And I guess when I'm following someone who is kind of historical and we kind of know what their end game is already, like Boudica is a good example. Like you kind of know how that story is going to go. You're kind of following that narrative arc to get there. But once we start getting like down into deep detail, absolutely not. The story will go off the rails and write itself. New characters will introduce themselves all the time and new conflicts will pop up. But as long as I kind of keep to that arc, I'm fine. Though I will say my first novel on Boudica, that Queen of Oak, like I was I had my outline, it followed the arc, and then somewhere along the way my brain said, it would be helpful if we knew like a little bit more about her when she was a little younger. Like maybe, she had a love before her guy. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's 30,000 words later. We have much longer novel. And now we also have a really important piece and character and life story that becomes like hugely influential in the whole rest of the series that was not planned. I had no inklings to write it, and it just came out of nowhere. So I'm a well-intended plotter, and that often goes by the
Good
wayside.
way to
That's
put it.
funny. I had one of those new character I find in my work, like if it's some kind of secondary character or new character who kind of pops up, if I give them a name, then all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
important to the story. Like yeah, just yesterday I did that. I had my character and she comes across this tent with this flag and it's like a bear on the
Mm.
flag and she remembers this guy he looked like a bear and like all of a sudden we're talking about the Fylgja and like people's like guardian animals and now he has a name and his father has a name and he has a backstory and I'm like okay he's an antagonist to my main character and I'm like wow where that just came
Do you ever
you
feel
know
like sometimes these characters are like whispering in your ear or something? Because I've had characters do that too. They just pop up fully blown. I mean,
Yes.
their backstory's there, everything's there. It's like you're not making up anything. All you have to do is stop and think for a minute and let it come in. And
hmm
it's so strange. So I wonder sometimes if, there's real characters out there who are whispering to you, or is it just a
Yeah.
manufacture of your own mind?
yeah
It is odd, right? Because they will come in fully formed, and I always say, well, that's a muse gift.
Yeah.
Like, but and usually those characters are so insistent, aren't they?
hmm
They
Yes.
really want to
Yes.
be in the story and they want their story told, right? And the first was no, it was the second Hervor novel. I had a character come in like second to the last chapter, and I had to go and rewrite huge sections of the book to accommodate him. And so, but it's like, where are you? Where did you come from? But I
yeah
agree with you, Joanna. I think that they feel real. Like, and we sound
hmm
so crazy when we talk like this, but like they feel real, like that someone wants their story told and has
yeah
decided you're the one that's going to tell that. And yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. Maybe it's just multiversal. I don't know. Does that make it better than I
I
don't
think
Yeah,
it's
who
like
knows?
magic. It's to me, it's
It
like
is. It's
magic. Like
writing magic.
when non-writers will sometimes ask me, like, "Oh, how do you get your ideas for stuff and characters?" And when I'm feeling quippy, I'm just like, magic. Like
But it's really
everywhere,
true.
everybody. I don't know. It just feels like magic when something like that happens. When somebody comes out and some character comes out of nowhere. So I remember we interviewed Octavia Randolph a few months ago, and she talked about she doesn't do any planning at all. She just sits down and lets those characters, what did she
And
call them? The
she
saga
uses
folk,
Mhm.
talk
she
to
uses
her.
dictation.
Yeah, that's right.
Remember, she said, I just go for a long walk and I dictate and it just comes to me. So,
Yeah,
you know,
she just lets the saga folk talk to her. So I
Yeah,
guess
that's
that's what we're
amazing.
doing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
it's really quite amazing. And, you know, I guess we'll never know if it's a construct of the human brain that does that, the storytelling brain, because, you know, storytelling goes back centuries.
Yeah.
I mean, thousands of years, really. It's so integral to it. So there's like a part of our brain that does that. But
Hmm.
but how does it do it? We'll probably
Mhm.
never know.
And I find too that when I have those characters like that, they seem to become fan favorites as well, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting to watch how that manifests together because they come as like that whisper, and then your readers really like that character. It's like, okay, it's almost spooky in a way. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, it's really cool. So,
I remember J.R.R. Tolkien talking about that with Faramir. His character of Faramir just walked out. He said he just walked into like the fields of Ithilien or whatever, and he was just like this fully formed character. And I love Faramir. He's one of my favorites in the Lord of the Rings books. So yeah, somehow, and a lot of people do. I don't know if there's something about that lack of preparation or
mm,
planning with those particular characters that obviously they've like grabbed you as the
hmm.
writer, so maybe that same thing is like translated and onto the page, and so then your readers are grabbed by them too.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that could well be. I think in Big Magic she was talking about that
Mhm.
notion that the story comes to the writer, and then so yeah.
Yeah, it's
Oh
really
yeah, I haven't read
amazing.
that in a while. Yeah,
Mhm.
that was good.
So I have another question for you. Do you ever get stuck?
Oh,
Oh,
good question.
And what do you
yeah.
do if and when you do?
So one of the nice things about writing historical characters is sometimes you know what the end is. So getting unstuck in those particular situations is easier than yeah, but then like when you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. But what happens to me is I sometimes will get stuck on a chapter. Like I kind of know what needs to happen there. Like maybe let's say, okay, I need a conflict between these two characters, which will be later resolved. Like that's all I know that needs to happen. And then I have no idea what that conflict is going to be. So what I might do is write chapter 15, conflict between this character and this character is important and needs to be later resolved. And then I'll move on chapter 16. I'm like, well, I guess we'll just find out what happens. So a lot of times I'll just bypass the thing, whatever that problem is. And many times that will be the last chapter that I write because as I keep going, the whatever that block was or whatever that issue was will sort itself out, or the seed of something will work itself out in the later chapters. And then when I go back and write that later, I'll look like a genius, like, oh my God, look at all this foreshadowing and stuff, like no, I had no idea what was gonna happen. So it does work itself out that way, but a lot of times I do have to just when I get stuck, I just have to jump over it or set it aside and just kind of hope that it will resolve itself in some fashion. So
And apparently it always does.
it does. It finds a way. So that little whisper pops in there and fixes it for me. So thank you to whatever that power is.
Mm.
Exactly. I find that little elements will pop up in a book that I will just kind of I'll put it in there, but I won't pay any attention to it. And then later in the next book, it becomes really, really important.
Yeah.
And they're like little, I don't do it on purpose. It just kind of happens. And all of a sudden that when I start the next book, it's like, oh, that's what that's all about.
It's so crazy, right? You're co-writing with something, but who knows what. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love those moments like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll actually like take little notes, like if I'm writing something and I'm like, oh, that'd be good in book 2 or 3, or oh, that's gonna have to come back to haunt this character or whatever. And I might jot it down, book 2 notes, do something about this. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Or 3 or whatever. I've
That's your
never written anything
subconscious.
past a trilogy, so I don't know what like how you all do it when you get to like books 5 and 6, and my brain
My
just
books just keep wanting to be written. I mean, like, I
Yours
don't
too.
know when I'm going to end this series, maybe never, because, like this last book, The Irish Harper, in that book, the next story planted itself just without me even trying. It just occurred. And it's like, okay, well, I know what the next book is going to be.
Mm.
And in fact, my writers group, they were teasing me about it, but I can't help it. It's just, I guess it's the way the brain works. It just sets
Mhm.
up the next book. And maybe because I've written enough of these books, the
Mhm.
next book it just suggests itself. I can't say that it's getting easier to write. I
Mhm.
would say that, I know more about what I'm going to write about, but I wouldn't say it's easier. How about you, Melanie? Do you find it gets easier the more you write? I mean, you've written a lot.
I think, yeah, I think it's sort of what this is what one thing I have learned is that when I have a long series like what you've got going, something long running, if I write that from book one all the way to book however many, that does get easier as I go. And then I think my mind and my subconscious are so immersed in that world that they're working, everything's working in tandem, and it becomes like I'm on that wavelength and I can just keep going and I can remember the details and that sort of thing, and that kind of that works for me. What I did this time was I thought I would be quick enough to alternate between a couple of different series, and I would go back and forth, and I thought that would be a good idea. That for me, that's a terrible idea.
That
So
sounds really hard.
it is. It's terrible. I don't know why I ever thought this was a good idea. So, because I do find each book is a bit difficult to write because I am trying to remember the details from the previous book, and I'm so grateful for my narrators because I actually go back and I re-listen to the audiobook so I can remember some of the minute details and things like that. And as I go, like it becomes, like I said, each book is a challenge to write. So I definitely won't be doing this again, this process again, but I think it just, yeah, it depends. Once my brain's fully in that world, I can just keep going, but that back and forth business is not working for me.
That would be hard. I would
Yeah,
get
I've
so.
done that. I've done that, but my two things are so totally different because I've got my Viking books and then I have another world, which is with another name and everything that
Mhm.
takes place in the early 1980s.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah,
like
really different.
so different. I can just drop into that other. Plus, that was my time period and everything. So it's kind of like just I don't have to do a bunch of research, and so I just kind
Yes.
of fall into that world, and it's like a little like palate cleanser.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good
For
way to put it.
so, but yeah, if I was doing two that were very similar, I would find it difficult too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I can do this I can do because they're so totally different.
So also, what are your research habits? I'm just curious about that since you've done such a huge variety of books and
Yeah,
cultures.
so I think I like the research element of. I think that's Professor Melanie kicks in and likes to do that part of it. And like I said, we were talking earlier, you can really get lost on the minutia, the little tiny details of things really easily. So I think before I will start a series, I will do a lot of research, like, and sort of with that academic mindset to understand the history and try to get it from multiple sources. Make sure I kind of get the details, the dates. Like Freydis is a good example. Like in addition to the documents that are my novels, I have other documents that have like full skeletons of the timelines and when did these certain events happen and who was born when and how old were they when this happened and when did Eric leave and when did Eric come back and when did he get banished? Like one of the 10,000 times did he get in trouble with the law? Like what years did those happen? Like what did he get in trouble with the law for this time? And who did he murder this time? So I'll have like sort of a timelines and things with those notes on the side so that it'll help me keep track of things then as I go through. So when I get ready to write, like, let's say this book two, that Sword of Valkyrie that just came out, I kind of went back to my timelines and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be writing from when Eric went into exile until Eric returns with his discovery of Greenland, right? So what were the events that took place? So now I have the listing of historical events. I have everybody's ages. I have all of the dates. I have like anything significant that might have happened, like Eric the Red's wife, the Jodhild, making that Christianity, that turn to Christianity and how her change in religious belief and how that just ends up being the thing that shapes Iceland, it shapes Greenland. Like, so those things that seem like they may not be like, they're just like points of history, but man, they're really going to influence my story, right? So I'll have all of that kind of like ready. And then once I have that ready, then I can go back in and then start breathing life into the characters, right? So into, Freydis and Leif are the two children of Eric that we know. Well, there's two younger brothers, right? We don't hear almost nothing about them. So who are they and what were they like and what happened to them? Like, so that's how that kind of works for me is I kind of get it all ready and then I go. But then as I'm going, like we were talking before, like if I need to know about, like what kind of birds were common then, or did they have, like, all right, did they have puffins like in this part of the island or not this part of the island? Like I got to know about the puffins because that needs to be accurate, of course. Otherwise the book's a total failure if I don't get the detail on the puffins correctly. So those little things, then I'll go back and look at those as I go. So,
Well, what are you working on now? You working on another Freydis book, or
right
are
now,
you in your like downtime because you just released a book? What was it? As we're recording, it was released last month, so we're
it was
recording in
released
April.
last month. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
almost
released in
recovered.
March.
I'm actually going to do a couple little palette cleanser books. You were talking about your 80s books. So I have these more cozies, this Magic and Chancellor series. These are very short books. They run from like 15,000 to 30,000 words. And so I think I'm going to I have 2 books left in that series. I'm going to maybe try to write those this summer. And see like that's kind of the palette cleanse. And then after that, I'll be working on Cardamandua again. Because remember, I had this brilliant idea to go back and forth between series. Yeah, that's great. No, but I have things on pre-order, right? So I'm kind of set with when things will have to be done and have to be released. So what I would like to do after I do those little short books is finish Cardamandua's series off. Whether that's 1 book or 2 books, I'm not quite sure yet. To see let's see how much story is still there, right? Like I know what needs to happen. I just don't know how many words it's going to take me to get there. And then after I complete Cardamandua's tale, then I'll be finishing off Freydis. And I think it will be a trilogy because in the next segment of her story, we have now arrived in Greenland. So we'll have the sort of time period where we'll like start with the development of Greenland and then start with the voyages that ends up in the discovery of Vinland or Canada, right? So I have those stories which will get us toward Freydis's endgame, which I won't reveal, but
Yeah.
but I think it's 1 more book. It may be 2. So a little palette cleanser and then finish Cardamandua and then finish Freydis. And then after that, well, you know how it is. I have like a list of books that I want to write. So I'm not sure which one I'll choose then. So
Well, you have your hands full.
summer's a busy time in our house. Like my kids will be home and then they've got a lot of stuff going on. And so, yeah, so summer I don't get as much written because I am busy momming a lot. So it's the balance of those things.
Summer is when I'm most productive because it's so hot here in Tucson that I stay indoors. So there's not much to do outside when it's 110. So
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we're kind of the opposite here. So
right.
in the Northwest, the Northwet.
Yeah, I empathize with you from Florida humidity in the summer as well. We don't like the outside either. So
yeah, we stay outside all summer long and then indoors all winter long.
all winter,
Seems
yeah.
like for sure.
Was there anything else we didn't touch on? Anybody have any last thoughts?
I think we covered everything I was wondering about. Do you have anything, Melanie?
I just want to share again to thank you for inviting me and for letting me talk with you today and hearing about your own processes as well. So we were all kind of in the same shield maidens together, so writing our stories. And I really think I love that we are all doing that and we're all putting these voices to these women's stories. And it's really important. I mean, sometimes it feels like, oh, we're just writing a book. No, not really. We're giving role models and we're just showing a different image of what what life is like, and I think it's important. And I thank you both for inviting me. So
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And well said. Yes. I like that. We're not just writing stories. These stories need to be told.
yes.
Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It
Thank
was good
you.
talking to you. Thanks for listening. You can find Johanna at johannawittenberg.com, where you'll find a free short story, a prequel to her Norse Queen series. And you can find me, K.S., at ksbarton.com, where you can also find a free short story from me, a prequel to my Norse family series. See you next time.